Hello and welcome to the Creativity Podcast. This is a series where we take a look at how creative people relate to and understand creativity itself. I'm your host, Nick Cook, and with me today is Riz Maslen. Riz is a music producer who's best known as NeoTropic. Hi Riz, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you for letting me be on the podcast.
Oh no, well thank you for being here. Right. So Riz, what does creativity mean to you?
That is the big question.
Yeah.
Creativity. Well, what is creativity? Well, for me, it's expression. It's being able to express myself. It's a vehicle that allows me to be sometimes a little bit self-indulgent. But I think for me, it's more of a vehicle to kind of say something without, I'm not like a novelist or a filmmaker, but I am very much influenced by those art forms. So I think growing up, I grew up in a very rural location. So I was surrounded by things that made me feel like I was part of the environment.
Okay.
So things like birdsong, living in a small village with farms.
And that's
so
in
that
the West
kind of
Country?
was my soundtrack. Yes. So, but my dad was in the army, so for me it was such a contrast to what he did up until I was 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got a job in a very rural garage. So all those sounds were very much part of my growing up. The sounds of car engines, motorbikes, and then people who were farmers and the countryside. So that kind of set me on this whole thing of, we would go on summer holidays every year, and summer holidays were always in the car. We always went to North Wales, or we always went to Devon. So I'd spend the whole time looking out the window, sort of dreaming up these little scenarios, almost like stories, but with the music of the car. You know, the things that my dad would listen to. So it'd kind of be like these weird home movies, but in my imagination. My favourite one was me riding a horse.
Okay.
And just galloping through the fields and jumping everything that came up. So I would just jump these huge fences and gates and until we got to the destination. So it was kind of on this huge journey. And that lived with me for such a long time as a kind of like, I guess it's a daydream. And I'd do that at school. I would sit and just stare out the window and start thinking of, I'd like to be doing this, not in the classroom. So then I started to learn to play instruments at school. So that gave me another outlet. I think also Sundays in our house, when we were growing up, was all about the record player.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough. And my parents would be like poles apart in their music tastes. And it's quite interesting because my dad passed away recently, and
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'd forgotten what a music person he was. And going through all his old records and CDs, I was absolutely blown away by his taste. He had a copy of Tomita, The Planets, and I never knew he was into kind of weird electronica. He was very much into prog rock, so I'm wondering if that was part of the whole thing.
Like an extension.
And also jazz.
Yeah. Big
band, jazz. Like he had all these, like Benny Goodman, what's the one I've got here? Django Reinhardt, Glenn Miller. I've even got some here. Yeah, Benny Goodman. My dad was also a big film person, so we watched a lot of films. I mean, he took me to see Star Wars. And Star Wars for me was just like mind-blowing. I remember sitting in the cinema with him going, oh my God. But it was also the music as well, which made it, because it made it just sound so epic. So for me, my relationship with sound and visual has always been really important. As you grow up in, natural sound is another huge thing for me. There are certain times of the year where until I hear a certain sound, which is so important to me to almost hail the beginning of summer. And growing up, it was very much part of my life, are the swifts. And I don't know if you're aware of what swifts make. They have a very distinct sound.
Oh,
so for
okay.
me, that's always about summer. And summer for me was always the best time of year because it was summer holidays.
Mm-hmm.
So all those things were so important to me. Sound, particularly, from natural world, birds, animals, but also things like I would spend hours in the local. I'd walk hours in fields and stuff. A lot of wheat fields, and so listening to that with the wind. And my sister still lives very much in Gloucestershire, so when I went back recently, she's got a really beautiful place where she walks her dog, so I'd always take the dog for a walk in the evenings, and it was the one place I could feel at peace, particularly with all the things that were going on in my personal life. And it really did just bring something beautiful into the whole madness of what was going on, the chaos of what was going on in my life with my family and stuff. So I guess that's also part of creativity, is also that place where you can go to have that release. I think that's very much about why I became, I guess, I don't know, because I've said this a lot over the years about how it's also mentally a way of releasing things that are going on within your personal life. You know, breakups, sad times, you know, whenever you feel that you're going through a bad time, music is the thing that everybody, well, I know I do.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
so
you lie on the floor and you put your headphones on and just get immersed.
Do you find that...
So it's such a difficult question.
Do you find, I mean, you talk a lot about natural sounds and or I guess just like environmental sounds. Is that something that you've tried to tap into with your own production consciously, or I mean, obviously it's difficult to say what you've done unconsciously, right? But is that something that you feel comes through in the music that you make?
Yeah, in the early days, definitely, and I think it still is very much present in my work. The thing is, I work in a room that I often have the window open, and if I'm recording, you'll often get seagulls in the background.
Yeah, I've just
always squawking away.
There's been a few just while we've been
chatting.
chatting.
I like that because I wouldn't take it out. I leave it in, even if I'm doing a vocal and I can hear this. Wah, wah, wah. You know, I was like, oh, that's brilliant, because that's a moment in time, so you can't take that away. And I think also, I always used to record stuff. Whenever I travelled, I would take something like, I mean, I had mini discs for a long time. I would record on a mini disc, or one of those recordable Walkmans you could get, and then obviously later on it would be a little portable DAC machine. And now you've got these really great digital recorders, which you can take, and they're small enough now. So I think I've always kind of recorded the soundtrack to my life, and then that's often been used. And I think I do it, you know, consciously, because I think it's a way of capturing something that is only at that time. You can't recreate that, or you can, but with a different kind of element to it, with music and stuff. So that then it kind of, gives you that moment in time again, and you can play it over and over again. It's on repeat. So
creating, I guess, in one way, is about capturing the essence of a moment, right? So, you know, in some abstract form.
It's funny when, I know this sounds quite morbid, but watching, it's quite weird talking about this, but when my dad passed away, I was there, and it was really strange because he waited for me. It's the weirdest thing. He waited for me to arrive because he knew I drove up early in that morning. He was really unwell. And my sister kept telling him, she's coming, don't worry, she'll be there. And we were talking about things we'd all done as children with my dad, and we were laughing about stuff. And it was almost like he waited for that moment and then took his last breath. And it was really poetic. As sad as it was so poetic. It was almost like he had something really, a memory that allowed him to make peace with himself and go. Because he'd been ill with something really quite awful for a long time, and he'd suffered. And I think for me, it was really important to see him have that piece. I know it sounds quite strange, but it's really stayed with me, and
it's quite beautiful.
I really had a chance to really let things, settle. If that's the right word.
Yeah. These kind of.
My dad was a big influence with music.
So, I mean, these. I mean, I think that often when we kind of make art, when we create something, it's kind of making sense of these moments and things, isn't it, in our own way, and kind of translating them perhaps into ways that we can sort of understand them a little bit more clearly, or to have something tangible as a representation of them,
I agree. I think I've always written emotively. I think it's always got that element within it, and I think that's important for me.
Yeah. So let's go. Let's go back a little bit. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into producing music in the first place? Because you mentioned playing instruments at school and influences from your dad and family and world around you. But how did you sort of start putting all that together?
I used to compete in festivals on the recorder, but they were classical pieces that you would be doing, and so that kind of, and I loved playing the recorder, and then I went to secondary school and then learnt the flute.
Do you still play?
I wanted to play the clarinet, but they didn't. I do. I'm lazy though. I don't practice anymore. I'm really bad, but I still play it, and I really enjoy it. I just need to practice more. And I've used a lot of those instruments still in all my music over the last sort of 10 years. They've popped up, and I really love the sound of woodwind. I think it's really important to me. It has a lot of, I have a lot of an attachment to it. And then I ended up in a band with my sister, and we were really bad, but actually we were really quite interesting.
Yeah.
She was the drummer, and I was kind of like the vocalist, and I did lots of weird, like, wailing. But it was quite an interesting thing to do, because it was really kind of experimental. And we entered something like Battle of the Bands, and we won a prize for being the most innovative, if that's the right word. So we were quite taken aback. But she stopped playing, which really annoyed me. I think she got pregnant quite, maybe in her early 20s, and so I had to stop. I was a bit, and then I worked with somebody else, and we used a lot of tapes, like analog tapes, because there was only two of us. We used to play with analog tapes a lot. So my journey's kind of just been meeting the right people, learning from them, and then my friend Adam went to university, and then I moved to London. I ended up working at a studio in Dollars Hill. Making cups of tea for somebody. I was basically just trying to get some knowledge, because I've been in bands, but I was a bit bored of just being the vocalist. It was a bit boring.
Yeah.
And I'd done a lot of shitty gigs with not very nice people, and being in bands where really you were just a sex object, and I just didn't want to be like that. And I just felt really uncomfortable. So I ended up working at this rehearsal studio, and worked with a really lovely guy called Hamish MacDonald. He was a fantastic producer, and I learnt a lot from him. And then for Hero, started renting a space, and the Future Sound of London. So I got invited to the Future Sound of London because they wanted some vocals, so I ended up doing some vocals for them. But I was really keen to learn how they did all their sampling in that. So for me, it was the introduction of, I don't have to be an amazing musician. I can do this through sampling. So I got a loan and bought myself my S1000, and then just a very basic little analog sec desk, and I used Cubase.
Yeah.
So and that's how it all started. And Brian and Gary were just really supportive. They really, said, "Come on, you can do this." You're really good at it. You've got good ideas. So if it hadn't been for them for encouraging me, I don't know whether I would have, So it was good. It was a good time because there was lots of good things happening there.
So what are your thoughts on sampling then? You know, as a kind of creative practice, if you like, and you know, how do you approach it?
You know, in the early days, I was quite, I didn't really know what I was doing. But it was great because you could take, I can't remember what it was like 10 seconds or something, and then you could stretch it, which is always good in the sampler. I love the sampler for that. And then obviously I got signed to Entone, Ninja Tune. And then obviously I met people like Ollie and all the kind of hip-hop guys. And obviously then they would talk about breaks and all the famous breaks and all the stuff like that. And you go on tour with them, and you just end up going to each city, and we'd all rush to the record shop to see who could get the most obscure record, so they know that they could sample it.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a real baptism of fire because I'd been doing quite left field stuff of that kind of thing, but then suddenly they introduced me to this whole thing of like, and Vadim was very good at that. You know, he was very clever at finding really obscure records. So, yeah, I think in the beginning it really did give me an opportunity to do that cut and paste kind of way of working. You know, as I moved on, I then started to want to do things with real drummers, live musicians. But I still have an element of that in my music now.
Yeah.
But now I tend to create my own samples by working with friends who are musicians. I'll get them to play something that I kind of want, or they'll send me something and I just cut it up. And I do it a lot with my own voice now. Just lots of layering or playing. If I was a better player, I could probably do it, but I end up like recording it and then cutting bits out and then making it up that way. So yeah, I like that. It's cut and paste.
Yeah. So it's you're kind of translating the same ideas, right, but into a different context.
Yeah.
I
think also I did like to pay an homage to certain movies that I like watching. So things like that did kind of slip into the early stuff of NeoTropic. So, and then people would then send me emails. Oh, I know where that sample's from. It's from this, and I'd be like, oh my God, you're right. But then you have to be really careful because in the early days it wasn't kind of seemed to be bad, but obviously later down the line, people want to kind of license your track and then be like a whopping big sample in there that just wouldn't be allowed. I think the biggest one I had was in Ultra Freaky Orange, which was from Space 1999. I did take quite a lot of that, which is quite bad, but I did love Space 1999.
Yeah. Yeah, so...
Was it UFO as well, was the other weird thing?
Yeah, they were Jerry Anderson, weren't they? Thunderbirds guy.
Jerry Anderson. I love Jerry Anderson.
Yeah.
I am of an age that grew up with all that, though. I'm like...
Yeah, I mean Thunderbirds, and I mean even they were even showing them comfortably into the 90s when I was little, 80s, 90s. So Thunderbirds and Stingray and all that stuff, never really dated. I mean it sort of does, but when you're a child, you sort of don't see the strings,
No.
Yeah.
And then he kind of made more adult shows. Yeah. So he was great. I think he was very innovative. I think all the stuff that he did was brilliant.
I think there's something about
it really did stretch your imagination.
Yeah, there's something about like British TV from that kind of period where they didn't. I mean, actually, this sort of doesn't apply to Thunderbirds because the reason I mentioned it at all really was because I just happened to see something about it the other day, and they were spending like £1 million and today's equivalent of £1 million an episode to make that. There was money behind it. So I guess I'm not really talking about that so much, but there was this thing where they would seem to do an awful lot with not very much, like especially like Bagpuss and a lot of those kind of, you know, those animations and Ivor the Engine and, you know, those kids programs, they you know, you look at them now and you kind of think, like, they are brilliant just for the way that they've, like, well, you know, the way that they've kind of put it together with just the scantest of resources. I think it's great, you know, and that's a big part of creativity, right?
Yeah.
It's like making do and making exciting and interesting things with just what you have available, you know. I mean,
and that is kind of almost translated into the cut and paste kind of way of making music too. You know, you have what you've got. You don't have a lot of equipment, and I didn't have a lot of equipment in the beginning, so I was kind of, you know, I had a very small setup that cost me 500 quid, I think, to put. You know, it wasn't a lot of money. Well, it was then, but when you look at it in today's terms, everybody needs to buy the latest software, blah blah blah. I think there was this really beautiful DIY ethic that I really loved, and I think people got it. And also my peers and contemporaries were all very much in that genre. So I think we learned from each other. We would trade stuff, you know. Try this record. Oh yeah, try that record. You know, and it was great. There was a real sense of community in the early days. And then it all changed because then it became really commercial, and people were then very much about, you know, and that's what progress is, I guess. So, but referring back to those TV shows, absolutely, I loved it. You know, Bagpuss. A little bit baggy at the seams, you know. He really was just a cloth cat. That's the beauty of creativity. You can have a really. You don't need all the big kind of, you know, whistles and whatever. You can make really beautiful things with very limited things, and I think that's what's really important. And you can get sucked into having the latest software and I don't actually have that much now. I mean, I'm more interested in buying analog synths and soft synths now, even though I don't have the budget. But yeah, it's interesting how you kind of revert back to a time before now, because you crave that originality of something that you can get from a plugin. I'm not saying you can't, but there's something quite lovely about playing something that's real. You know,
definitely.
That there is something, and you know, I've just started in a new band where we're all about playing live with real instruments, and it's just been an absolute joy to kind of go back and be in that environment where, yeah, we have a backing track with a drummer who has a click, but that's fine. But most of it is all played by the people on stage, so it's not like we're reliant on a laptop, you know, which I don't have an issue with either, because if the music is great, it doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned. So I'm not, you know, up my own arse to say that, oh well, he's just pressing a few buttons, but who cares? If it's entertaining, then love it, you know.
So I think what we've been kind of talking around and talking about as well, I guess, but it's the idea of limitations breeding creativity, breeding ways of kind of taking those limitations and kind of almost throwing them out the window. I mean, existing within them and creating within them, right? But in such a way as to transcend them, you know? So, I mean, how do you feel about that as an idea?
I think that's very true. I think the generation that now is my nephew and my niece are very much governed by things that are at their fingertips, you know. And I don't have any issue with that. But it's also important to introduce them to things that aren't an electronic device. Something that's actually, you can, you know, they have a piano in their house at my sister's house, but I never hear them play it. It's in the corner. And whenever I go there, I'm just so edgy. I want to play the piano, I want to play the piano. And because it's all stacked up with stuff, you can't get to it. And it's really sad, because it's this beautiful upright piano that my sister's had for years, and it's just sat there gathering dust. And I just would love to walk in and see one of them playing it. But it's a different generation, you know. And my grandfather was an amazing pianist. And he loved playing jazz. And you know, he had a room in his house, I remember as a child, where the piano was. And you're only allowed to go in there at certain times, because it was like this sacred kind of place. And the only time I ever saw him playing it was when he was drunk. But he was amazing. But, seeing someone play the piano, and I would just be in awe of this man who could play the piano. So, yeah, I think sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful. Hearing somebody play something on a piano is just,
So why do you
amazing.
Why do you think that is, Riz? The simplest things are the most powerful.
I think we are now bombarded by, and I love technology, and I love the fact that we're moving into this new kind of world of progress and machines, and probably way beyond when I'm dead and gone, the whole world would be like Westworld. If you've seen the new TV series, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But there is just something so beautiful about. I've never had the balls or the lessons to be able to just sit at a piano and play.
Yeah.
And I have friends who can do that. I spend my whole life going, if only I'd learned to play the piano at 6. I wish I'd done that now. Because it is there. You could do it. You can play music. You don't need anything else. You don't need to plug in. You don't need to turn something on. It's very powerful. Any instrument you can just pick up and play, an acoustic guitar. Something that isn't driven by... And you can take it... you can't take a piano on the beach, obviously, but you can take an acoustic guitar.
Well, I mean, you could. They did in that film, didn't they? That Harvey Keitel film.
Well, they took the the piano.
Yeah. I think it's Harvey Keitel.
It's a very beautiful beat.
Yeah. Beautiful piano. It was beautiful piano as well, wasn't it?
But, it's an amazing film. But, it's just a very powerful thing. And, it's like, I'm not a religious person, but if I go into a church and someone's playing the organ, I'm just like, I sit down. Because it's just the space. Because everything is in a church, obviously, it's built for carrying sound. It amplifies it. So, for me, it's funny, when I travel, I always try and find, like, the local church. Because I'm fascinated by the whole kind of structure and architecture of churches, because they're very clever. And they often have the most amazing stained glass windows, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
But they are the most amazing places to sing in because of the way they are created. Everything just, your voice will carry. And that's powerful for me. I mean, that's just amazing. I'm just always... I went to Jakarta in 2012 because I was going to Borneo. And I stayed in a house right opposite the mosque. So every night, I know they amplify it because they have to call for prayers. I would just be sitting at the window because it would just, you could hear it, and it wouldn't just be there. You could hear other mosques doing it. And so you've got this kind of almost layering of call to prayers coming through. And it just blew me away because I'm in a different country, but the one thing that we are all able to kind of communicate or commune over is music. And it does. It transcends everything because you might not speak the language, but you know what music does to people. And I think throughout all my travelling, it's the one thing that is our common language in a lot of ways. Because, we might not like all the same kinds of music, but you can kind of connect with people over that. And being in a country that I wasn't, didn't know a lot about, apart from it being very full of smog and, couldn't breathe, but just being next to this mosque and hearing this at whatever time, dusk or something, was amazing.
Yeah.
So it is that whole kind of ethereal thing going on. It does, you get chills. It's like, back of the neck, hair standing up. It's amazing.
And that seems like a good place to finish. So thanks once again to my guest, Riz Maslen. Riz, where can people go if they want to find out a bit more about you and catch up with what you've been doing?
The best place to go is my Bandcamp, which is NeoTropic, and you just go to www.neotropicbandcamp.com.
Cool. All right. And I'll put links in with the blurb for this podcast. I've been Nick Cook. This has been the Creativity Podcast. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, goodbye.